Hello and welcome everyone to the dedicated series on budget by ETCFO.com, which is the initiative or the dedicated news portal of Economic Times. Every year we conduct this budget expectation series on both the verticals, which is ETBFSI.com and CFO.com. And we try to understand what is it that the industry, specifically the finance leaders, the CFOs, accountants, auditors, and economists at large, expect from the budget. In this particular show, I have, must say, meaningful and top panelists from a diverse range going to discuss and share their expectations and the pain points and what exactly they expect from the government. So let me introduce them one by one. My first speaker for this particular discussion is Mr. Kalishwaran Arunachalam, the CFO of Crompton Greaves Consumer Electronics. Kalishwaran, good to have you.
Pleasure, Amol. Thanks for having me here, and look forward to learn from my fellow panelists and share some of the expectations that we have been looking at from a budget perspective.
Sure, certainly. My next panelist is Ms. Yuvika Singhal, the economist of Quantico Research. Yuvika, glad to have you.
Pleasure is mine. Thank you, Amol.
Next speaker is Mr. Ashish Tiwari, the Group CFO of Transport Corporation of India. Ashish, good to have you.
Thank you for having me here, and my pleasure to be here.
Thank you. And my next speaker is Mr. Piyush Kakkar, the CFO of Rebel Foods. Piyush, good to have you.
Thank you for inviting, and it's a pleasure to be part of this panel discussion.
Sure. And my next speaker, who comes with a great academic background, Mr. R. Narayan Swamy from IIM Bangalore. He's the professor of IIM Bangalore, who's now retired, but he's working as a part-time member to NAFRA. Sir, glad to have you.
Thanks for having me.
So to begin with, I have a couple of common questions and specific questions, and we'll also take questions from the audience. So readers, viewers, those who are watching this show, please feel free to shoot your questions. I will try my best to take it with the speakers that I have. And let me shoot my first question to you, Yuvika, to begin with. Being an economy and the economist at always, front when it comes to the budget. When everybody is thinking that the government should spend more, they have been putting lots of money into the Capex. In fact, last year they put 11,000 crores, a very interesting number. A lot of people feel that perhaps the same number will be followed. But when it comes to the fiscal, that is a challenge. There are a lot of economists believe perhaps government will look at fiscal consolidation far more seriously this time. So what's going to be your sense?
Well, more broadly, I think the task is fairly cut out for the finance minister. They have to consolidate from a fiscal deficit to GDP ratio perspective, because they've already laid out a map and a roadmap where they want to achieve a 4.5% of fiscal deficit target in FY26. So obviously they'll have to walk the talk as far as that is concerned. But I think what they need to balance this fiscal consolidation with is the need to ensure that growth remains stable in the economy. So in the last 1 year, we have seen growth impulses weaken in the economy. The Q2 GDP growth, which came in at a 2-year low at 5.4%, was somewhere like an eye opener. And there's a lot of chatter about growth looking on a somewhat weaker footing. While we do believe that the first half of the growth was somewhat driven lower by temporary factors stemming from the timing of the national elections, or it was the intense heat waves, or the excessive monsoon in some regions, there is likely to be a backloaded recovery in the second half of the year, thanks to the timing of the festive season, hopefully no inclement weather, and maybe some little backloaded support to growth coming in from government capex. But having said so, I think this year the focus of the budget should be on implementation. Remember, when the interim budget was announced just about 6 months ago, it came with a much shorter timeline for implementation. So the focus should be on getting whatever was announced in the interim budget in terms of newer policy, prioritizing certain policies. The focus should continue into this budget. So balancing fiscal consolidation and prioritizing growth should be the two levers on which this budget should be placed on. Also, remember, like I said, it has to be seeped into implementation, largely because this year there is literally no need to be populist in nature. You're presenting the budget on the back of a Lok Sabha election win, and also there are very minimal state elections that are there scheduled in the course of this calendar year, just perhaps to Delhi, which is due in February, and there's a backloaded one in Bihar in the year. So there are no strong political compulsions to go out and appease and be very populist in nature. So all they should try to do is keep it a budget which is focused on the economy, focused on implementing some of the focus areas that they had already highlighted in the interim budget, and provide a stimulus to growth, which is needed at this point in time, given that we have seen growth decelerate somewhat. So that's largely the focus. I think the budget should be, kind of putting the spotlight on.
Hmm. I think I couple of points, but I copied this particular point, Yuvika, which where you said that no need to be populist because elections are over. No need of freebies. Important points. I will come back to you on that a little later. But let me go to Mr. Narayan Swamy and understand your sense, sir. What path do you think that the government should take right now? Last year they spoke about the employment, the women, and many other aspects. There were four themes majorly. Broadly, if I ask you, what is your sense? What do you think? What path government should choose this time?
I think the focus should be on growth, because without growth, you can't achieve anything. So, for example, for fiscal consolidation, you need growth. For employment, you need growth. So, growth is, I think, fundamental. Now, the problem here is that it's no longer, I think, entirely within the government's control, because increasingly we find that India's growth, this is one thing that happened with our globalization, is more and more tied to the global environment. And the global environment is particularly not very good. So, what we are seeing is typically our exports have been to the three major jurisdictions: United States, Europe, and China. China is less, of course. So in both the US and Europe, you have a lot of protectionist impulses. So they want to give priority to their own uh, businesses, and I think that is something that it's going to cause some worry to us. So my worry here is, I think it's not just for this year's budget. I think making India competitive, I think, should be the real thing that the government should be working on. Making India competitive is not something you can achieve overnight. It's not one budget exercise. It's going to be a long-term thing. In a sense, it has been in the making for a while, but I think the momentum has been lost. I feel the last series of elections that happened, to an extent, the government was sort of derailed from its earlier focus on the economy.
Right.
So I think the focus should be on growth. The other thing is that I also find that where growth is happening, it's actually not benefiting everyone. And there is a lot of, I live in a small town, so I understand this much better. There is a lot of underlying anger among people in the lower income groups. So the
Right.
thing is that they think that growth is benefiting only the rich, and of course the rich are visible. So obviously this is something which also makes an important political issue. So the way the governments, both center and state, I see them doing, responding to this popular, what might be called a popular unhappiness, let's say resentment, by giving freebies. So this freebies thing also has, I think, outlived its utility, because to an extent it's no longer possible to uh, maintain the momentum. There is fiscal space limited. So I think tightening growth, employment, and then taking care of the international environment, all these are going to be priorities for the government this year. I think the longer term approach should be to promote competitiveness. I will come back to this theme later. So I think the approach should be to make India more competitive, Indian businesses more competitive. That's, I think, the surest way to proceed.
Sure, I think very relevant and realistic points, and it's not just people at a lower income. In fact, middle class are also very unhappy in my discussions, because somehow people are not going to accept the fact that they are paying even GST on the chai and the coffee, right? So we'll come back to you and try to discuss more on the momentum front. But let me now focus specifically on the CFOs, as large audience of this particular portal is also CFO community. And Kali sir, I will come to you. followed by the other CFOs. When I speak to the CFOs, they are worried about two things. One is the compliance, and second is the ease of doing business. Again, this both goes hand in hand. So, what are the major pain points as a CFO that you see right now, which perhaps government can address in the budget 2025? Kali
Yeah, I
sir,
think,
I just
thanks.
want you to just move forward, and
Yeah.
yes, and please go ahead. Yes, please go ahead.
Yeah, see, I think I would like to start with few remarks. I think Yuvika and Professor captured it when they started their opening conversation. See, fundamentally, we are at that stage. I do believe we're getting into the best phase of the country. If we look at the geopolitical situation that is there wide across the world, and if we look at the kind of growth challenges that many other economies are facing, India is probably best poised in its approach to where we wanted to look at the long-term goals. We have laid out the Vikshit Bharat objectives of where we want to reach. But I think from a people perspective, we are there. I think we are very well poised to reach that. Having said that, I do believe there is a lot that can be done in ensuring that we are a real growth-oriented economy. We talked about K-shaped recovery post-COVID, and today we are probably into 4 or 5 years into COVID, and we are still seeing only a K-shaped recovery. The growth is not coming at the bottom of the pyramid, and for us as a country, if we have to achieve the objectives of Vikshit Bharat, it is important that we bring in inclusive growth. Inflation has become a real big challenge as we speak, right? And for a country like us, if inflation is going to be at this rate, consumption will become a definitively a second priority. We're already seeing that in discretionary items, people want to defer it because their food basket and their day-to-day consumption cost has almost doubled in the last 3 to 4 years. So it is very important that government comes out with a roadmap as to how are they going to address the inflationary pressure that people at the bottom of the pyramid are bearing with. And if money is available in their hands, and if government figures out a way to get money into them, that will drive consumption to the next level. And this is super important. And I'm sure that as to government will come out with actions to ensure how do we need to go about it. Now, when it comes to ease of doing business, I think we have made progress in terms of how do we want to look at it. But I still think a lot can be done. At one end, we find government is, as we speak today, we are having a Kumbh Mela that is happening, the largest event ever in the world, which is AI and data driven. But I still believe when it comes to day-to-day business operations and day-to-day processes and approvals, there is a lot that digital technology can bring in. We are still not tapping the most out of it. So it is not about what is that the government has possessed in itself to do it. It is about the ability to lay out a roadmap by saying, from an ease of business perspective, how do we drive the digital infrastructure to its best, and how do we need to look up it? Connectivity, I specifically wanted to touch base on rural. I think today rural economy is very, very important for us to grow as a country. MFI, we understand that currently there has been challenges and RBI has cracked the whip on MFIs for the very right reason of interest rates and other things. But also that's the only way we'll be able to bring in rural into consumption. Rural India is not going to buy a product with a full payment or a monthly payment. You need to come out with tailored solutions that are low cost, and you're able to give them an affordability on a weekly payment or a daily payment, etc. So if MFI's current model of operations are a challenge, as government, we need to look at what is the alternative that is going to come in for that. Third, I think last budget laid out a lot of emphasis on how manufacturing needs to be nurtured. Now, this started with an outlay that has been laid in perspective of manpower support that the government wanted to give, whether it is in terms of first-time PF payment or a CSR budget to be utilized for training people, so on and so forth. But I think it is still very, very nascent stage. I would really look up to the government to come out with how are we going to nurture manufacturing in this country. We have seen globally countries which has been service-led economies has struggled beyond a point of time. And for us, manufacturing is a great strength. As we speak, we know what is happening with China, and China plus one is today reality. And what more we need to do to encourage manufacturing is something that I would love to hear from the government, and also work on ease of doing business when it comes and tries to promote manufacturing in the country.
Noted. I think it's a long list, but very relevant points. And thanks for highlighting that. I think we have been talking a lot about manufacturing, but we have some limited success there. But I think need to do a lot. Ashish, please go ahead. I
Yeah.
would like to tell us the
So
pain
I
points. The same question to
so I
you.
think
And
most of the points have been covered by earlier panelists, especially Yuvika and Narayan Swamiji. Um, I think I was just thinking uh, about the agri sector, and uh, I found that some 40% of total workforce, in fact, the total population is being employed by the agri sector. And then coming to the budget allocations, they are merely 1.5 lakh crore last year, and maybe I think some 5-6% incremental outlay in last 4 and 5 years. So I think because of this is also one of the pillar in the Viksit Bharat, that we talk about the poor and the women, farmers and the youth. Government has to seriously think about some technology uses and increasing the outlay. So I think by doing that, probably that employment would be secured, and then the agriculture productivity, which is one of the lowest in the world, would also kind of enhanced. Uh, Another focus area for the budget probably can be the employment part of it, and of course manufacturing and those sector would be obviously going to increase that employment rate. But government has to come with some comprehensive policy document, white paper, in consultation with the state governments to kind of increase the employment, because today I think some 30% of total workforce is below 30. And this, and with the advent of AI and things like technology evolutions, I think this problem has to be sorted out for India perspective. Uh, Third is, as we talk about the disparity, richer and the growth that is more contributing to the richer aspect of economy.
right.
Um, uh, India has a very low that tax base. If we talk about the direct taxes, I think some 6-7% of that population is under direct taxation. So that is also one of the concern area. I think that percentage can be increased with further putting some more measures, initiatives, and so that when you increase the tax rate, your receipts would be increased, and your physical. This will also support the physical consolidation as well.
Right.
While you can also reduce the tax rate for the middle class and things like that. So that can also be one of the focus area now, I think.
Right, right. I think that is quite a need, because considering the way the direct tax has been increased and adding indirect taxes to it, I think a lot of people are in fact paying more than 35 to 40% tax, directly, indirectly. So valid points there, Ashish. Let me come to you, Piyush, and take your understanding also. What are the pain points that you are seeing, and specifically from, if you look at the geek economy, startup economy, because you're dealing with those new companies a lot, what is it that you would like government to do?
Sure. Thanks, Amol. So I'll break the discussion in two parts. One is the specific challenges that I can share more from a food and beverage industry, and second would be in terms of the ease of doing business. What are the expectation? Now, starting more with what are the challenges that we are facing or we would want government to address. I think the first is the GST. For restaurant business, it's 5% GST and no input credit. Now, the whole concept of GST was about an incremental value addition on which the GST should be charged, right? And that's how it works well throughout. I think over a period of time, what has happened is that there are far too many slabs and few of the industry where GST input credit is not eligible. As a result of which, the whole cost of doing business goes up significantly. And even when it comes to investment in Capex, you don't get that 18% input credit. So I would seriously request the government to consider this. I think that is a right way in terms of making sure that the value addition and only a proportionate charge that comes in. Maybe today it's 5% charge to the customer and no input credit. Tomorrow it could be a 12% charge and an input credit being given. So that's one specific point. Second is more around that there are some exemptions given for a right reason. For example, up to 20 lakhs, the GST is not being charged. But what happens is that there are times where some amendments are being given, where if a landlord is not paying GST because they are below the threshold, it is now collected on a reverse charge mechanism from the company. Now, again, when it's recovered from a company which is not able to pass on the GST, it becomes a charge. So I think if the intent was to not charge to people who are doing turnover less than 20 lakh, then we can hold on to that spirit rather than passing the burden to the recipient of the service. Third is more related to startup ecosystem, which is on ESOPs. I think in case of ESOPs, there are two times that charge is being done. So one is beneficiary employees have to pay income tax when they exercise the ESOP, and second is when they convert to the shares. I think if we can sort of eliminate these two steps, move to only a capital gain tax at the time of selling, then I think that would really benefit because this is a real way in which compensation is rewarded in the startup ecosystem. So that could be one thing to consider. So these are the three points that I wanted to highlight for the industry. As far as ease of doing business is concerned, uh, I think it's just one point about how can government leverage the big data because government is
Correct.
using data very well. Based
Hmm.
on it, is the government right? Or else
Okay.
could be a deemed registration. For example,
Okay.
already has 150 registration. For 151st also, there
Hmm.
shouldn't be hassle of visit and try to get the registration. So I think somewhere the data should be leveraged. We can bucketize the payers into people who are the top bracket and following the rules well. I think there we can try to sort of go away and get into a deemed approval. And second would be similar approach to reduce application. So these are two thoughts in terms of specific and ease of doing business.
Okay. Noted your points. I think it was good to begin with. In fact, noted a couple of interesting points from all of you. And readers, viewers, please feel free to share your questions. I will take it, during my conversation. Coming back to you, Yuvika, you spoke about implementation, which is one of the very important point. I think apart from the major pain points and the current challenges that we discussed, FDI, private capex have been also major issues in the economy. What do you think government should keep it in mind as a top priority now in terms of boosting the capex, private capex, and maybe the FDI as well? Because I think until and unless we don't solve these two issues, I think all other problems, maybe growth or job creation, perhaps will not happen. So if you, I'm sure, must have done your maths with the data on both the fronts. What's your view?
So honestly speaking, at least for the foreseeable future, Amol, both these routes, whether it's private capex or getting money through the FDI route, appear somewhat challenging. And let me put forth my arguments why. So if you look at the global environment, that's turned fairly hostile. I would, if I could use that term. And we are
Yes.
probably staring at a changing global economic order driven by a much different trade order that we have been used to in the past. So,
Hmm.
protectionism, tariff wars, these are some of the themes that we are probably staring in our face, and it's only a matter of time that not just India but every other economy will have to grapple with. Now, in such an environment, and it's not just the recent slowdown in FDI flows to India, but if you look back at FDI flows globally, since probably 2016, 2017, FDI global flows have been on a downtrend. Global FDI flows peaked prior to that, around 16 probably. And you have
Correct.
to understand why that has happened. That's largely because if you would remember during Trump's first version, that was the time when protectionism as a buzzword and the application of higher tariffs started to play out. And
Hmm.
since then, we have never seen a phase of global growth which has been without any events or maybe black swan events. So while it was protectionism earlier, followed by COVID, Then we have seen geopolitical tensions mount, Ukraine-Russia war, followed by crisis in Middle Asia, so on and so forth. So we've never had this period of global growth, clean global growth, without any economic or geopolitical event in the last at least maybe 7 to 8 years. And what this means is that the global growth environment doesn't remain conducive as far as FDI flows is concerned. And this year especially, we are now seeing coming together of not just geopolitics but also protectionist kind of policies, both coming in together, which we have not seen in the past. So either in the past we saw geopolitics or we saw trade protectionism being discussed at the global level. This year is going to be exceptionally difficult because we are talking about both almost simultaneously. And then from a private capex point of view, to be honest, while COVID did help to turn around the balance sheets of the private sector, in towards deleveraging and turning healthier, but honestly, we have not seen a full-fledged private capex recovery in India, not just post-COVID, but not even in the in recent memory. Probably since almost a decade, we've not seen a private capex recovery take shape. And you have to understand that in a global environment, which remains challenging, we are talking about tariff wars, protectionism, and a domestic environment where we are talking about slowing urban consumption. It seems very hard for the private capex or the private sector to come and say that yes, we will sound very gungo about private capex, and we will start investing monies. We have not seen that even in the last 1 to 2 years, when from a macroeconomic perspective we have had a spate of lower interest rates, we have had a spate of stable commodity prices, balance sheets of the corporates looking fairly healthy, but we have not seen a private capex recovery. Everybody's waiting in the wings to have this phase of growth where the global economy turns supportive, the domestic economy is somewhat on a stronger footing, which is not happening. And I don't see that also happening in the next 1 year. So uncertainty continues to remain high, which is likely to play out on both FDI as well as the private capex cycle. So the moot point here is that the government will have to yet again do the heavy lifting as far as the capex cycle and growth is concerned. We have seen that in the past, in the post-COVID years, with government really stepping the paddle on government capex, and this year is likely to be no different.
Some part of it sounds really sad, but that's what the reality is. Actually, it's sad to know that this is going to continue. But I think your observations are right, that despite having the steady rates and situation under control, I think the private companies could not come forward. Noted your points, and let's see the government looks at heavy lifting here. Narayan Swamy sir, you spoke some time back about that we have lost the momentum. If we have to bring back the momentum now into the picture, what are the 3-4 bold movements or the steps that the government needs to do, maybe to correct the momentum and maybe to deal with the situation in a far more meaningful and realistic manner, and look at the micro picture as well and not just macro picture?
I think Yuvika has spoken a lot about the international environment. I believe all that to be true. In fact, I think it's a lot worse than what she has said, because she also have things like oil prices, because with the US being more aggressive on Russian sanctions, oil prices also will have a problem. Now, remember, without all of these things, the rupee has been falling. Now, I have been wondering why the rupee has been falling. So the rupee has not been falling in response to something that happened on that day. I think it's an expectation. So there is an expectation that things are not going to be entirely good. It's not just the rupee. Even other emerging economies are having a problem. So when I say rupee, I'm using it as a proxy for other emerging economies as well. So the thing is that the international environment is definitely not good for us. Now, therefore, we have to think, and I don't think there is any hope of that getting better. In any case, it's not under our control. So what I think the government should probably be thinking about is working for a long-term solution. Now, in the past situations like this, the government would pump in money and then ask banks to lend and so on. I think the space for all that is very limited now. And those games have been tried out enough and more in the past. So I don't think there is any possibility of that happening. So I think it's actually a good opportunity for us to think about what kind of country we want to be. Maybe, say, since the Prime Minister talks about becoming Viksit Bharat. So what do you want to be in 2047? I think this kind of a low-end manufacturing business that we have been aspiring to be in the past is not going to happen. And there are enough competitors for those. So I think we have to think about not the government, also the private sector, have to think about investing in innovation, R&D. I think that is probably what is going to generate future jobs. The kind of jobs that we have had in the past, they are all being taken away by AI. I have been speaking to some people in the IT industry, and they are definitely not very enthusiastic about their job prospects. They're saying right now. So I spoke to someone who is working on cyber security. Now he says, "Oh, cyber security is something where AI will take a long, long time to catch up." I told him, "Don't be so complacent because AI is already doing a lot. So maybe AI will also catch up with this." So the thing is that the kind of things we have that have come to our rescue in the past, like IT and so on, pharma, I am not very sure how much they can do now, because there are fundamental structural technological changes happening. So innovation, R&D, skilling. Now the government in 2014 started very well by starting a skill development program and so on. I'm not very certain that skill levels have much improved. Maybe the skill development was not very targeted, and I'm not very sure whether it has contributed a lot. So there is so the problem of what the PM spoke about before the elections in 2014. There is, on the one hand, there are unemployed people. On the other hand, there is demand for skills which the unemployed people don't have. That gap continues to be there. And where I've been observing also people at work, even very routine kinds of things, they are not able to do the kind of quality work that you would expect them to do. So skill levels are low. So the corporate sector will obviously be very, very, because the productivity is low. The prices have to be high. Consumer prices have to be high. So this is what I think the government needs to be doing: improving productivity by skill development, R&D, and innovation. I don't think this is going to happen. The outcome is going to happen tomorrow for the next, election. The outcome is not going to be available then. But I think the
Right.
government needs to be thinking about these over time. This, I think, is a longer term vision which the government needs to have.
Right. No, I think I absolutely copy you, and I think I like this statement. What kind of country we want to be in 2047. I think that's where we need to have those stronger policies, and we need to head there, because things are not going to change in a day. Noted the point, sir. I think three, four people have asked one question specifically about job, and you touched on that. So let me take some focus on job itself. So, Kaliswaran sir, let me take your views, and maybe then we move to other CFOs specifically on the job creation. So there is a big mismatch in the industry. That's what we are seeing now. On one side, there are people who wants job, and there are companies who wants to hire, but it's a big mismatch. One, what are you doing at your end maybe to kill this gap, and how are you going to look at that? And more importantly, on a larger basis, last year government came with an internship scheme. So what should be the long term strategy from the government maybe to boost job creation in the country?
Yeah, I think I'm going to build on what Professor said. See, today I was disheartened to read a report where we had to look at Harvard and Stanford having a large part of their, significant part of their people not getting placed. So, which is not a good news to look at it when people go into Ivy League. There is certain skill sets that they're supposed to acquire, and that is supposed to be relevant for the industries that they go in at a cost and at an availability. Now, what it means is that what got us to where we are today is not going to get us to the next level. I think fundamentally, job creation, I'm going to one step before. We need to start with an educational reform. Job is an outcome of what is the educational reform that we need to do, and what kind of education that we need to imbibe to the future generation. As much as we are looking at job creation to be in manufacturing sector, service sector, or agriculture, I don't think so. We have done a lot on the educational side of it. There is technology that is coming in on one side. There is new skill sets that are required for people to go up, and there is a lot of unlearning that needs to be done from a traditional perspective to where we are to where it is. Right today, people look at filling roles with certain skill sets, ability to grasp, quickly deliver outcomes, and then move on. what used to be a time when if you need to get it to a particular level, you need to have 25, 30 years of experience is going away. It is about you able to fit into a role and can you deliver the outcomes. Now, from that perspective, I think there's a lot that needs to be done on the educational reforms. I don't think so. This is an area that as a country that we have touched for a long time. Time has come in the Vikshit Bharat. Probably it is important we lay down a clear roadmap as to what is our educational reform is going to be. I think we need to move away from the fact that we have made a great progress from where we were to making education available for all, affordable for all. Now it is to make education relevant for all, and that needs to be contemporary, and we need to revise that on a periodic basis. That's on one side. Coming specific to corporates, what are we doing at it? Yes, I think government did a lot last time in terms of the manufacturing side as to how do they want to provide and create employment and encourage corporates to look at it. We, from our perspective, have already started the work on it, and we are leveraging two or the three schemes that was laid out last year budget to see how can we provide more and more employment to youth in the manufacturing sector. Couple of things that we would love to look at it very specific to our industry. We have a lot of after sales service. I think for a company like us, we are about $1 billion and we have 1,000 plus after sales service centers. We would love the government to make it inclusive and make manufacturing plus after sales service as one net. And I'm sure there are many, many industries which has got an after sales service setup, which is extremely critical to ensure that the pipeline gets completed. So this will provide fabulous opportunities for youngsters who do their ITI training or a diploma or a basic course and come out. And we need to look at a skill development that needs to be created for the entry level youth. That's a great option. And if I look at India as a whole, there will be 10, 20, 30,000 service centers that we are going to provide for it. That's one thing that I would love to lay it out. Second is tech. I think we are really, really going and upping our ante on tech side of it. How do we create jobs that can be done by tech and that has to be done by people? Old way of doing it is about diversifying between thinkers and doers. Now it is more about tech and non-tech, and how are you going to leverage that? So these are the two, three lenses in which we are looking at it internally. And from a government perspective, I would really love to hear more on the educational reform.
Yeah, noted your points. I think yeah, that's the beginning. I think that's the foundation, because when people are not there, the talented and the skilled people, I think that's a very valid point that you raised. Piyush, let me come to you, and this question is specifically about the startups. Obviously the government have huge plans for the digital India, startup India, stand up India. Uh, the gig economy is also shaping up really well. But still, when I speak to startup founders, they feel a lot of challenges, whether it's GST standardization, the registration of the GST, standardization of the GST registrations across cities, countries, states, and also supporting startups in terms of expanding abroad in different states and the countries. Anything from that side that you would like to expect from the government, Piyush?
Uh, I think I spoke about in terms of the GST registration and all enablement, right? I think there
Yes.
the taxes can be either a central or state, but I think the whole evaluation should be done at a central level, and then
Hmm.
moment one has a confidence for a particular startup, right? Then you should enable the startup to accelerate across the India. I think if we waste 60 days in GST registration versus that we could generate more employment and get deeper into that state, right? So I think that is one thing, that simplification of the tax reforms is something
Right.
that is the need of the hour, especially like my co-panelists mentioned, especially in a times where we are struggling for consumption. This
Hmm.
becomes a every step is an enabler to that, right? So
Hmm.
one thing is about the ease of doing business in terms of registrations. I think government can sort of leverage the big data and centralize data, and then do a faster approval or a deemed approval. The second is about that whichever startups or corporates which are trying to generate employment, I think how can it be more inclusive and given some more benefits around it. For example, we run around 400 cloud kitchens in India, and we have plans to add 150 more cloud kitchen over the next 2 years, which
Right.
means that we're going to generate almost 2,000 to 3,000 more employment across
Hmm.
the brand team, the delivery partners, and all, actually, right? And we bring them on our payroll. So
Hmm.
I think whenever any company is trying to generate the employment, how does government support? And we not only provide employment to the employees, but also about trying to take care of their ecosystem in terms of medical insurance, in terms of some of the family benefits and all, so that over a period of time the next generation does not feel a job as only a means to earn, but it's more
Hmm.
inclusive, right, where even their families are taken care, and that's how they will have those wherewithal to educate their next generation and they come up the ladder actually. So I think these are the two things that I specifically wanted to highlight. One is about simplification on the registration kind of things, and the
Right.
second is about incentivizing where the genuine employments are getting created.
Okay, I think yes. Quickly, Ashish, do you want to also add on the job creation part, which is kind of an integral to the economy, and you come with a sector which is organized and inorganized in a lot of ways, and job creation is one of the important segment over there.
So one is I would add to Piyush that that 2 minute loan actually it can be there in the GST registration. Today we are seeing a lot of hassles while you go for a GST registration. So government really has to work on that. Yes, you are right that logistics is one of the in the service sector is one of the largest employer, and
Hmm.
because of that, there is both organized and unorganized sector in the logistics.
Hmm.
Um, there are challenges in terms of employment force for
Hmm.
logistics, and
Hmm.
we do aware of that, and especially for the drivers.
Right.
So today there are a lot of challenges in finding the drivers and so on and so forth. I
Hmm.
think apart from the direct employment, the government also should focus more on the entrepreneurial aspect. So one
Hmm.
is, of course, is the startup ecosystem,
Right.
um, where there is there are a lot of incubation and there are big players around that. There are institutions around that, and that system I think is working fine. Apart
Hmm.
from that, I think that government uh, may come with some kind of incentivizing the corporates
Hmm.
who
Hmm.
do kind of invest in the ecosystem in which they are. So, for example, if some corporates in the food industry, so probably they can invest in the startups ecosystem around the food industry, and that can be incentivized by the government.
Hmm.
We do from our company we do startup which are in the technology side of it in the logistics.
Hmm.
Likewise there are many corporates who are doing it, but it is not been especially uh, uh, encouraged by the government, so that can be one of the action plan. The second is on a direct tax. There is a section 8JJ8JA where corporates get kind of some tax exemptions, incentive deductions. So probably that can also be seen in a bigger way to enhance the employment. And third is small scale industries,
Hmm.
local for vocal and things like that. So it has to be more localized, the employment. Then comes to the migration part of it. So I'm seeing a big challenge in terms of the migration from the some of the part of India to
Right.
the metro cities and things like that. So that has to be. I think that this time to kind of for a holistic kind of a growth and development environment, uh, uh, employment and the opportunity has to be localized,
Hmm.
and there is a need of a comprehensive policy paper from the government side in consultation with the state governments to kind of come out with something like that.
Right. I think I'm getting a lot of very, very extremely relevant points from all of you, specifically on the industry side and how to move ahead with the businesses. That's really notable. Yuvika, let me just slightly shift your focus on debt to the GDP. We spoke about what government can do, FDI, capex, and fiscal also were discussed. But on large pieces, if you look at the debt to GDP or the debt as a whole has been increased, and that seems a worry for a lot of financial analysts. considering perhaps we might not grow aggressively in next couple of months or a year, with even NSO has given those numbers. Do you see the debt rising up? Do you see the government has a strategy to reduce the debt, or they will just go slow on that part because the spending is important right now?
So I think there are multiple ways to look at it. First, let's talk a little bit about growth, because that's important. If we have to bring down the deficit levels, debt levels, everything is benchmarked to the GDP growth, right? The nominal GDP growth. Now, here I think we have to understand that the cyclical correction that we've seen, or we are expecting to see in this fiscal year. So we are talking about a GDP growth in the vicinity of 6.4. That is what our expectation is a sizable slowdown compared to the 8% plus average growth that we saw in the past 3 years. And this cyclical slowdown is being driven by a variety of factors. So, like I said earlier, urban consumption is slowing. Government support to Capex has been somewhat on a weaker base this year. Private Capex sector doesn't seem to be interested in spending so far. And then we are also looking at some kind of unwinding post-COVID still unfolding in the economy. And then there is a global backdrop which doesn't remain very conducive. So I would probably say that this 6.5% growth that we are looking at is probably in some sense a mean reversion of India's growth to its trend growth. And probably the 8% plus growth that we had seen in the aftermath of the COVID was probably a divergence. I would not see that as a trend growth. So somewhere we have to be content looking at the current global environment and looking at how things are shaping up domestically, that this 6.5 to 7% growth is a broad range of growth that is likely to remain not just in FY25 but probably in 26 and 27 as well, until and unless we do a certain set of reforms. We unleash a version 2.0 of reforms, whether it's on the GST front or land or labor, until and unless we do something which shifts or induces a tectonic shift. I don't see us going back to an 8% growth. Like I said, that seems to me as a divergence from trend. We are back to trend growth of 6.5 7%. So that is essentially what we are staring at as a reality check. The
Right.
second point is that the government has walked the path as far as fiscal consolidation is concerned. So from a 9% plus fiscal deficit ratio, we are now, almost halfway mark. 4.5% is what the government has laid out in terms of its target for the next fiscal year. Having said so, I think there is a certain degree of understanding within the government quarters as well that they would ideally want to reduce the debt to GDP ratio as well. And if you would remember, there was a lot of chatter from the finance ministry that going forward, maybe they would want to do away with the fiscal deficit target and probably want to focus on government debt as a parameter for assessing the fiscal position or the fiscal metrics of the economy. And I think that
Right.
is where we would want to hear the government much more vocally in the budget. And remember that our fiscal deficit at 4.5 is still higher than what the erstwhile FRBM, the Fiscal Responsibility Budgetary Management Act, which had laid down India's fiscal deficit at the 3%, which is the most sustainable level that they had pointed out. That committee has probably lived its life, and we are now in a very different economic time and era. And I think now it's probably pertinent at this point in time to go back and set up another committee and see what is our end goal. So we are talking about fiscal consolidation, but we don't know what is our end goal. Whether should we stop at 4%, whether we need to go back to 3%, and what is the concomitant level of debt to GDP ratio in the economy also that we need to aspire towards. So again, the numbers that were there were probably given by a committee which was almost a decade ago. So now I think the time is probably ripe to relook at some of these issues and set ourselves certain tangible goals which appear achievable given the environment that we are currently living in. So I think that is what I would want the fiscal policy and the finance minister to talk about, delve about the roadmap to what the fiscal policy should look like over the course of the next 1 decade.
Oh, absolutely. In fact, 1 decade is very important, that timeline, and not just 6 months or the 1 year, going ahead.
Absolutely.
Very, very relevant points. I think time is slightly limited here, but I will obviously take 1 minute with each one of you now quickly. Uh, Professor, one important question is, Mr. Kaleshwaran spoke some time back is about the education policy, and someone else also spoke about it. So while we speak about the major gap between, what the companies are looking for in terms of the employees and what the employees are having, there is a major skill gap. Any suggestions you have, any recommendations that you have, since you're come from an academy background, that the government should do specifically to build this gap?
So first of all, I don't even know if there is a comprehensive study of skill gaps in this country. Now, what are the areas where we need skills, um, and why are we having problems there? Looks like the market is not taking care of this problem, because if there is a problem of, let's say, shortage of certain trades, typically you would expect the market to handle this problem, but for some reason that's not happening. So the skills, I think, quite a few people from industry pointed out this. We need certain kinds of skills, but it's not available. I think Mr. Tiwari pointed out, for example, drivers and so on. This, I think, is a great, given that right now, tomorrow, I don't think they're going to have self-driving trucks available in this country. So given that, this is going to be a labor-intensive operation. So I think we need a skill gap survey, first of all, to find out where we need to do this, not just at the top levels, but also going all the way down to trades, let's say, all the way to, let's say, actual physical work being done. But I just want to shift the conversation, if I could, to something slightly different. Now, I have spoken to a lot of people in small, mid-sized businesses. I don't think they are feeling, on the one hand, they are all feeling the pain of GST, that everyone told me. But the so-called reforms, ease of doing business, I don't think they are feeling it at all. For example, one of the persons told me that running a factory today is far more difficult than it was about 10 years back. So I think governance has to improve, and the days of big announcements, are all over now. So, for example, import license was removed, done away with, export license done away with, the rupee almost started floating. All this happened. So I don't think there needs to be anything more on that area. At the actual working level, is there any improvement in the way people can do business? The focus has to be with the state governments and local governments, because a lot of approvals have to come from them. So
Right.
I think this is where I think SMEs, because I am a kind of I have a lot of sympathy for SMEs, because the conditions
Hmm.
under which they operate, they're extremely terrible. On the one hand, they can't get capital, and then they have to comply with lots of things that bigger businesses have to do, and their bargaining power is very poor. So I don't think people are interested in starting new businesses now. So making business, starting and sustaining easier, a lot has to be done by state governments and local governments. So this, I think, is
Right.
a big governance issue. This is what I think I would like to. It's not something that the budget can address immediately, but certainly if
Yes.
some guidance can be given,
Yes, at least
that's
there
very
has to
helpful.
be a strategy and there has to be a consideration to resolve such issues or the nexus between the state and the centrals. Yes, Professor, very, very valid
Yeah.
points. In fact, I buy your point that there has to be a comprehensive study about the skills and education policies. So I think the time is very, very limited now, but I will still take 2 minutes and, with all three of you. So quickly, Kali sir, I just want to ask one question to all three of you, because again, you guys an analyst, economist, professor has a different background, but three of you are the one who's actually dealing in the industry and part of the India Inc. As such. We discussed a lot of challenges. If quickly, I want to ask you one question to three of you, starting from Kali sir. What is it that you do not want to miss in this budget, which you think government must and should do?
One thing is pretty difficult to restrict, Amol. So I think I'm going to be very specific to the industry that where I come from, and therefore there's a little bit of vested interest behind it, and a couple of things which I think will have a larger ecosystem impact. One, I think housing. I think the government has taken a lot of initiative on housing, affordable housing, and other infrastructure that needs to be done. But I think there is a lot that needs to be done. As we speak today, houses that are costing less than 50 lakhs, there is no demand for it. Houses costing that are above 1 crore, it is flying off the shelf. That shows a huge amount of disparity. And if consumption needs to happen, affordable housing needs to be truly affordable. And that means that there has to be a credit inclusivity also that we need to bring in, where it is something that the government ties it up end to end and make it really something people can get in. And today, for a country like us, having a roof that is owned by people is a real dream. And I would really urge the government to see how can we make this true. A lot of incentives and tax reforms that were around this were all taken out over a period of time. And today, for a middle class Indian or an average Indian to buy, on one end, we have all the pundits come on a YouTube and say why it is bad to invest in a house. Why is it good to go on a rented house? On other end, we are trying to say why is it important that we need to have a roof on the top. Extremely and why is this? Because in a country where your interest cost is running at 7-8% and your inflation is at 4-5%, we need to find out a path where the middle class ambitions are really achieved. We may developed India, developing India, wherever it is, our strength is middle class. And for us to drive the country, middle class consumption needs to go up. So connected to that point, I would really love the government to leave money in the hands of the middle class by looking at tax reforms that will make it much more easier. If they are not going to consume, everything is theory, and that's not going to lead to any results. So I would really look forward to this budget where they are able to get and allow money back in the consumption, people who consume, and ensure that the consumption trend picks up.
Sure. Ashish.
Yeah, so on the top of it, Kali sir, one is that tax reform, of course, and especially the tax rates, which are quite abnormal, while the base is very low. And the second is of course that is the continued infra capex. Of course, it would largely impact to the logistics sector. It should continue. It has doubled in last 3-4 years, probably, and because the mood is low, as just started, I'm afraid of something else. So let it be on after this 1 week time.
Sure. Piyush.
Yeah, specific to the F&B sector, I think just to fuel the whole momentum around it, I think move the GST from 5% to 12% with input credit. That would really give momentum to the industry, and then the industry can focus in terms of driving the consumption and the expansion, which in turn will create the jobs also.
Right. Certainly. I think remarkable points. Middle class consumption point was really the need of the hour is what I can see from everywhere. But I think the growth of this country matters the most now than ever. Thank you so much, Ashish, Piyush, Professor Sir Kaleswaran, and Yuvika for sharing remarkable thoughts on this particular discussion and being part of ETCFO.com. Thank you so much.
Thank
Thank you.
you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.